What's up, guys? My name is Joseph, and today I'm bringing you the second episode of my new series, In Theaters Now. Real quick, if you haven't checked out last week's episode yet, you can do that here. Both of the films I discussed are still in theaters, so feel free to watch in order to get my opinion on whether or not they're worth your time. Spoiler, one of them is my second favorite movie of the year so far. This series serves two main functions, both of which tie into the ethos of this channel. Number one, I simply hope to encourage people to visit the theater more. I truly believe in the life and world-changing power of films and art in general, and I believe we have a responsibility to engage with the creations being made around us so that we may better contribute to the world in our own lives. The second reason for the series is that even after saying that, I understand that not everyone has the time, the money, or even the interest in seeing each new slate of films released every weekend. That said, it is a genuine passion of mine, and it is my goal through the series to act as your guide through the world of films in theaters now, to help you sift through all the noise and present you with just one or two standout films from every month that I can all but guarantee are worth your time and money. Real quick, before I dive into explaining how this series will work, please like, comment, and subscribe. It goes such a long way in helping the channel. Also, let me know in the comments below if there are any films either in theaters now or coming out soon that you'd like me to review in a future episode. Now, the way this series works is by evaluating a batch of films in theaters now, scoring them across a number of categories, and by the end of each episode, declaring a winner based on the total number of points. I've never been the most technically inclined when it comes to making or watching films, so these categories largely encompass the story side of movies. And these categories are plot, both in theory and execution, characterizations, acting, the edit, the messaging, both in theory and execution, and then a bonus category where I can basically assign extra points for whatever reason I may want. Without further ado, it's time to introduce the films for the second episode of In Theaters Now. And the films are The Amateur, Warfare, and The Ballad of Wallis Island. The Amateur is a John Wick-esque espionage revenge thriller, starring Rami Malek as Heller, Lawrence Fishburne, and John Bernthal. Warfare is the newest feature by Alex Garland, director of last year's Civil War, as well as other notable films like Ex Machina and Annihilation. It is a real-time, realistic depiction of combat during the Iraq War. The Ballad of Wallis Island is a sweet and subtle indie dramedy rom-com that follows an exceptionally extroverted man who pays to bring his favorite band out of retirement for an intimate show on the secluded island he lives on. Very, very light spoilers for these films going forward. We'll start off with the plot category. As previously mentioned, this category is split into both theory and execution. This is because even if a film's plot isn't perfectly pulled off, I still want to award an original or interesting idea, as I think inspiration should be taken from everywhere. We'll start off with The Amateur. This film draws very clear and obvious inspiration from other secret agent revenge films, such as Taken or John Wick. Though it wears these inspirations proudly on its sleeve, it still manages to remain distinct due to its premise of having its protagonist be a meek computer whiz rather than a professionally trained killer. In terms of theory, I'm going to give The Amateur a 7, as though it is not holistically original, it does stand on its own as an idea. In execution, the film is also largely effective. Proper time is spent developing our main character, building the stakes, establishing the tone and direction of the film. That said, I can't give the film too much credit, as it does fully stand on the shoulders of a premise we as an audience are already familiar with. As such, many of the plot points are telegraphed from a mile away. There's also the issue that a lot of the film's events are very convenient for our main character, there are minor plot holes, and some of the story beats get pretty repetitive. However, all in all, I will be giving the film a 7 for execution as well, as it's all done effectively, and even its detractions were not so bad as to make the film unenjoyable. Next up, let's talk about the plot of Warfare. This film is pretty interesting. As previously mentioned, it plays out almost entirely in real time, and it is more than anything focused on the accuracy and immersiveness of being a soldier and a human being on the ground during this conflict. A major selling point of this film was that it was exclusively drawn from real combat experiences of American veterans from the Iraq War. This is a point I will get more into during the messaging category. In theory, I won't lie, I think it's a little bit muddy to focus solely on a single perspective of any real-world conflict, even if it was a purposeful conceit of the film to not focus on the details behind the war or even our character's mission. For that reason, I'm giving Warfare a 5 in theory. Fortunately, in execution, it plays out way better than it potentially could have. For starters, at the very least, this film, which focuses so heavily on the immersiveness of real combat, absolutely nails that aspect of it. It is thrilling and exhilarating the entire way through. The buildup is done expertly, and when shit does hit the fan, it's incredible to watch from a technical standpoint. And, though again I'll touch on this more in the messaging segment, the film does sneak in some small moments of commentary that aid your connection to the plot and to the characters tremendously, and keep this film from being a glorification of America's propensity to wage war unjustly. Though the plot isn't the most detailed, in execution, this film still gets a 7 out of 10. Finally, let's discuss the plot of The Ballad of Wallis Island. This film is remarkable for its ability to find a way to put a fresh spin on a story that clearly borrows from established genres and tropes. Ultimately, the biggest note I have on the plot of this film is just that the main idea of it, that being inviting a retired, divorced band to play a show specifically for you and nobody else, is brilliant and original. And for as absurd as it is, the movie finds a way to make it feel believable and natural. In a lesser movie, this would have been unbearably gimmicky, almost like a Ben Stiller or Will Ferrell type of comedy. The fact that this movie feels as grounded as it does is a testament to its writing. Each detail is perfectly placed, each story element handily set up and paid off. Everything is so neat. For both theory and execution, this film gets an 8 out of 10. Next up, we have the category of characterizations. This category essentially boils down to, do the characters feel specific and original, or do they feel more like caricatures or archetypes that we've seen before that act more as plot devices than as real people? Starting off with the amateur, outside of Heller, I honestly don't think there are any solid or unique characterizations in this film. They are all highly plot devicey and only serve to either advance or combat Heller's agenda and ideology. The women specifically are incredibly underwritten in this film. Though Fishburne as Henderson does have a slightly meatier presence, it's still nothing we haven't seen before, and I couldn't help but notice how derivative and underdeveloped most of the characters were. They weren't ruinously bad, but just painfully average, and as such, I will be giving The Amateur a 5 out of 10 for characterizations. Warfare almost has even less to talk about, though it isn't really the fault of the film, as it isn't interested in focusing on the details of characters' personalities. And yet, even though we get almost nothing individually, the ensemble as a whole does provide a great deal of range for the ways in which people handle this degree of violence, a degree of violence that we were never really wired to enact or to witness. Due to this, and due to the understated yet believable nature of the characters, I will be giving Warfare a 6 out of 10 for characterizations. Finally, The Ballad of Wallis Island is specifically the kind of movie you use to describe how you can inject an idea that has been seen before with new life solely based on the characterizations. This film's plot is largely predicated around each character's personality. Events unfold because of the specific arcs and choices characters make. And more importantly than anything, the characters each feel remarkably specific. Charles's character, again, could have come off gimmicky, potentially Jar Jar Binks-esque, and yet through the writing and performance, which I'll get to, he manages to perfectly ride the line between being obviously overbearing for other characters in the film, yet endearing and hilarious for the audience. Nell and Herb similarly ooze depth and earn their believability, never coming off as plot devices. Their arguments and conversations feel naturally built up to, rather than shoehorned for the sake of providing conflict. Even the side characters are fleshed out to a degree they really didn't have to be, and are again wonderfully specific. For characterizations, I'm giving The Ballad of Wallis Island an 8 out of 10. Next up is acting. Now, the difference between acting and characterization is that characterization largely comes down to the writing and the script, but acting gives the actor much more blame or credit for how their character actually comes off in the film. Starting off with The Amateur, it's solid for the most part. Malick and Fishburne are the easy standouts, but there aren't really any weak links aside from Julianne Nicholson. However, I can't put that solely on her, as she has almost nothing to work with as Director O'Brien, aside from delivering some cringe-inducingly base-level lip service on the importance of accountability. Nothing too notable in either direction here. I'll just be giving it a 6 out of 10. Warfare is a great example to explain the difference between characterization and acting. As though the characters, by design, aren't really fleshed out, the actors do an incredible job across the board in displaying the raw emotion, fear, pain, etc. of contemporary warfare in ways that fully transcend their lackluster characters. It is truly hard to watch, in a good way, as these characters are put through hell on earth and you buy every second of it. And this immersiveness is largely due to how effective the acting is. For that reason, I'll be giving Warfare an 8 out of 10. The Ballad of Wallis Island is similarly a masterclass in acting all around. Each actor elevates the material and gives the film texture and warmth. Tim Key is a specific standout. Through his line delivery, facial expressions, and timing, he uplifts what again could have been a very standard character. Every actor displays a remarkable attention to detail, and so I'm easily giving The Ballad of Wallis Island an 8 out of 10. Now, the edit is a bit of a loose category. Of course, it deals with how well the film is edited in terms of pacing, sequencing, clarity, etc. But this category is also subjective in the sense that it is largely based on how I personally felt while watching the film. Starting off with the amateur, I can't lie. Things get a little confusing at points, and I inevitably found myself checking out sometimes and waiting for the movie to eventually explain everything with an exposition dump. That said, the technical feel of the edit is solid. It continues to ramp up its intensity throughout the film. You can follow the broad strokes of what's going on very easily, even if some stuff does get lost in the weeds. The action scenes allow you to really understand what's going on spatially, rather than disorienting you with a lot of cuts. Overall, I'm giving The Amateur a 6 out of 10 for the edit category. Now, the edit of Warfare is beyond impressive. It expertly employs tension, subtly building up until the ultimate explosive payoff. It switches between moments of clarity and then effectively communicated confusion and discombobulation. The real-time element of the film is given the weight and impact it was hyped up to deliver. Everything is so cohesive and tight, and so Warfare gets an easy 8 out of 10. The Ballad of Wallis Island has some pretty invisible editing. It's well-paced, the sequencing of events for both clarity and revelation is done well, and there are some really great comedic cuts. Nothing too noteworthy here, just an easy 7 out of 10 for some effective invisible editing. For our last official category, we have messaging. I believe that movies, and really all art, should strive to make us think or make us feel. It doesn't mean everything has to be serious, of course. You can get effective messaging from any genre. But if you have a story that doesn't actually say anything and is more so just a collection of events, I find that to be a pretty disingenuous attempt at making art. This is another category that I'm splitting into both theory and execution, because again, even if a movie doesn't pull off its theme, you can still get something out of the idea behind it. The messaging of The Amateur is really interesting in theory. The film's main themes center on the emotional and spiritual toll of taking a life, with a distinctly poignant monologue stating how you lose a part of yourself each time you take another person's life. The film also seemed interested in bringing up the importance of institutional accountability and transparency, especially within agencies that have the capacity for violence. The idea of these themes award the film a 7 out of 10 for theory. In execution, however, these themes are not really represented by the movie. Heller's character is very inconsistent with how he feels about his killings, even within the obvious path the movie is trying to put him on. And by the end, it doesn't really use him as a character to say anything of significance. The theme about institutional accountability is even less developed, and is relegated to only a few poorly written monologues delivered by director O'Brien, but without ever actually exploring the nuance and danger of an intelligence agency that doesn't value transparency. In execution, this film gets a 4 out of 10 for messaging. Warfare's messaging is pretty light, but absolutely existent, and fortunately, it falls on the respectable side of not glorifying war in the media, and instead criticizing it. The events of this film are portrayed honestly and accurately, to the extent that you are able to truly imagine and sympathize with the horrors of contemporary warfare. To be honest, I was a bit worried about this movie, as it was co-written and co-directed by an Iraq War veteran. I worried we might get a film that dangerously lacked nuance, painting Americans as the unwavering heroes against the evils of a falsely homogenized nation. Fortunately, the light commentary we do get seems to point to the idea that America should never have been there in the first place. It doesn't hide from the fact that we didn't view the lives of innocent civilians as important compared to the necessity of completing mission objectives. And, though I won't spoil how, this film acts almost as a microcosm for the war as a whole, using the inclusion of a civilian family and their interactions with the American soldiers to signify the devastating and destabilizing effects the war had on an entire nation. For both theory and execution, the film gets a 7 out of 10. The messaging of the Ballad of Wallis Island largely centers around learning to allow certain things to stay in the past in order to truly move on, to let yourself appreciate them without actively needing them to feel fulfilled. I love how this film really sticks to that theme, rather than opting for a much more saccharine or cliche story where everything is tied up in a neat little bow. In addition, though I can't exactly describe what I mean, this movie is incredibly human as well, which I feel is also a part of the messaging. So many of the conversations and interactions contribute to an element of thoughtfulness and emotional depth that the film carries throughout the whole runtime. Simple one-off sentences or character reactions display a level of authentic humanity that provide important layers of depth to the ideas that this film is trying to get across. Overall, this film gets an 8 out of 10 for both the theory and execution of its messaging. Finally, we come to the bonus category. I won't be giving any extra points to the amateur. I will, however, be giving Warfare 1 extra point for its insane sound design. I don't even pay attention to that kind of stuff, but I couldn't help but notice how expertly it was done. The Ballad of Wallis Island is going to get 2 extra points, specifically for Tim Key, 1 for making me laugh and 1 for making me cry. If you couldn't tell, this performance, and honestly this whole film, really impressed me. Now, after scoring these 3 films in all of my categories, we can see that we actually have a generally positive batch of films, with the winner being The Ballad of Wallis Island with an impressive score of 41. I'll go ahead and say right now that I actually have The Ballad of Wallis Island as my favorite movie of 2025 at the moment, and I believe it fully deserves its place as the top film of this week's episode of In Theaters Now. This film has that sort of new age indie vibe in the vein of Dinner in America, and unless you really don't enjoy those kinds of films, the kinds that focus on a small cast of characters talking about their emotions, I would seriously recommend this film to anyone. This is a movie I can see a lot of people developing a serious connection to, and I know Charles is a character I will remember for the rest of my life as an emblem of positive masculinity in a similar tier to Waymond from Everything Everywhere All at Once. The runner-up for this week's episode is of course Warfare. By its nature of being a war film, let alone an American war film, this movie will inevitably be appealing to less people. If these kinds of movies aren't your thing, I don't think this is the movie that will really change your mind. That said, if you want to see by far the best action film of the year so far, and a film I can almost guarantee will be up for awards consideration for tech categories at the end of the year, then please go and check out Warfare. I can't emphasize enough how immersive and exhilarating this movie was front to back, so long as you can look past the admittedly large elephant in the room of it not being the most meaningful film about this subject matter. Now, The Amateur comes in last place. It's honestly only in comparing this movie to 2 noticeably stronger films that its flaws become so pronounced, as I honestly still had a great time watching this and left the theater glad to have seen it. I would say this is one that you'd probably have to be a little more invested in to begin with in order for it to be worth your time. Whether that's because you enjoy this genre, or you're like me and just enjoy watching new movies for fun, I would recommend The Amateur for those reasons, or to anyone who's just bored and wants to kill a few hours on a solid action film. That does it for this one, y'all. I hope you've enjoyed. Once again, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. It goes such a long way in helping the channel. Let me know what other films you're interested in seeing me review, and stay tuned for another In Theaters Now next Friday. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye-bye.